You are listening to the Overcome Pornography for Good podcast, episode 25. Welcome to the Overcome Pornography for Good podcast, where we take a research-based, trauma-informed, and results-focused approach to quitting porn. This approach has been revolutionary and changed thousands and thousands of lives. I'm your host, Sarah Brewer. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the podcast episode this week. I am so excited to have my friend Lindsay Poelman on the podcast. She is an amazing coach, and we met through the coaching world. She was certified through the life coach school like I was, and then we did some advanced certification together through Jody Moore. And she is, man, I just feel so lucky to know her, and I'm so excited for you guys to get to hear from her today. She specifically coaches, well, and I'll let you kind of tell a little bit more about who you coach, but her Instagram bio is, I moved past the pain of my husband's porn use, and I can help you heal in your marriage too.
Yeah.
So go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, Lindsay.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, likewise, I'm so happy to be here because any chance I get to hang out with you is just always a total bonus in my world. But my name is Lindsay Poelman. And like Sarah said, I'm a certified life coach. And I did we met doing the advanced faith-based training. I'm also sexual trauma certified. And I am here to empower women in any marriage, no matter what your husband is doing or not doing. So whether he's stopping, or not stopping looking at porn, I am here to help you heal and in turn, open yourselves up to living a life beyond what you can even dream of right now. And I will tell you, it is the most incredible, being a part of it for me with my clients is one of the biggest honors of my life. It's just so beautiful and so amazing.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Is there anything you want to tell us about your background, how you got into coaching or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my husband and I got married. We got married in 2006. And we were kind of like your typical, I don't know, in our opinion, the typical, check the box couple where you get the degrees and you get the advanced degrees and then you find the big house and you have the babies. And it's kind of I think I had this idea that if I just checked off all these boxes, and I think my husband did too, that things would just kind of work out. We'd have problems, but not problems, you know? So it's I think I really did believe that I could earn my way out of certain problems or something like that. I don't know. And so about, let's see, maybe 10 or 11 years into our marriage, my husband was working as a dentist, earning six figures. And he texted me one day and just said, "Hey, can we talk tonight?" And I was like, "Sure." And I thought I'd gotten in trouble. I thought something I'd done something wrong. And he proceeded that night to tell me that he'd, been looking at pornography and lying to me about it over the past, I think 2 to 4 years. And Sarah, devastated, was so anytime I'm talking about my past, it's just where I was at the time. And I just want to be really real about that too, because it was heartbreaking. It was earth shattering. Words can't, it literally felt like a dagger had gone into my heart. It was so painful and so hard for me at the time because I didn't know what I know now, but also I think, sometimes that betrayal it felt really big and huge. And I think another reason it was so hard is I took it really personally, incredibly personally. And so through, therapy and things like that, I got to a place of general apathy and acceptance. But I just remember being hungry for more and just thinking there has to be more than a marriage of general apathy and acceptance towards my husband's behavior and the marriage. And so that's when I found coaching. And that is when everything changed for me.
Yeah, I love that because I think that that's probably a point that a lot of people get to is apathy, or maybe just trying not to think about it and just acceptance that, okay, well, this is just going to be how our marriage is.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember talking to very trusted therapists and professionals, and was like, is it just always going to be like this? Is it always going to be like a problem in our marriage? And they kind of looked at me like with a little bit of like, it was like loving pity, but it was like, yeah, it kind of is. So the reason I bring that up for the listeners is that is just absolutely not true. Like it does not have to define your marriage, and you really can heal and evolve and be happier than ever if this is something that you're working through right now. So
yeah, which seems to be kind of a similar message for people struggling with pornography, right? It's, oh, this is just something you're going to have to struggle with forever. Bummer.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of reminds me, totally. It kind of reminds me of like alcoholics, like the idea of like being an alcoholic. And it's like, I'm 20 years sober, but like, shouldn't go into a bar anymore. Like you're once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And I just totally don't think that's true. Like your behavior doesn't have to identify you. And for us women, our husband's behavior absolutely does not have to identify us either.
Yeah, good. So let's hop into, I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to just spend time talking about that are the big questions that I get about this from the spouses or from the partners or from the girlfriends or the boyfriends or whoever it is. Okay. So first one is someone asks how to have trust again when you're not sure that they're being honest.
That is such a good question, because I think that's where a lot of people come to me, Sarah, is they're like, I don't know what to trust, right? I don't know when I should trust him. I don't know when I shouldn't trust him. And I wish there was like a really quick answer. Like you just do this and you're good. But what I want to offer is like, the good news is that the trust starts with you. So it starts with you, and it always has. And in my program, I teach, like, I have this like self-trust triad that it almost helps my women have like a 360-degree way to develop out their self-trust so that they can be more assured in their decisions about trusting him. Because the thing is like when we're deep in our own self-trust, we can have our own back as we like navigate the ebbs and flows of our marriage, whether he's behaving quote unquote trustworthy or not. Right. And so I think sometimes we think the trust has to be there or else blank, blank, blank. And what I want to help my women see is like, either way, no matter what he's doing or not doing, lying or not lying, I can trust that I can have my back and show up and support myself no matter what he's doing or what he's not doing. Because usually we want the trust to have some sort of like certainty or safety. So for me, I like to teach my women how to create that for themselves. And so that even as like he's filling things out and we're filling things out around like what we want in our marriage, we can like still kind of be like, have a stake in the ground for where we want to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's so good. Just this idea that it starts with us, and that we can create this safety and the security that we want to feel, even if our partner doesn't change what he or she is doing.
Yeah. Cause I think that's where we feel so powerless sometimes, is we're like, I just need to trust you so I can feel okay. But then that leaves us like in like a position where we don't have any power because we're totally dependent on their behavior. So I like to turn it around for people so they could feel more empowered.
Yeah. And is that possible, Lindsay? Is it possible to feel that even if your spouse doesn't change?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. Like 100 times. Yes. And here's the thing too, is I think that even, it only takes one person to change the dance of your marriage. And so a lot of times, like our perception of our marriage is just that, it's our perception of the marriage. And so us being willing to do the work on ourselves to take those steps, I think it helps, honestly, like when we put a stake in the ground for our own self-love, self-trust, self-confidence, and acceptance, what it does, in my opinion, Sarah, is it helps us see more of what the true essence of our marriage is. So for me, choosing to turn inward and look at coaching, I remember like a very, very low point where I was like, I think honestly, my words were probably something like, I can't control anything. Like I have no control over what he ends up doing. He may do this. He may never do this again. For my husband, he'd stopped working because of some childhood trauma and anxiety and depression that came to a head. And so I was really frustrated after a certain amount of time because he wasn't healing on my timeline. But I remember getting to like this pivot point, which felt like a low point at the time, where I was like, I just can't control him. So I really just have to figure me out. And once I just stopped expending energy on what he was doing or not doing, it like everything changed from there. And I learned how to do the work on myself to get to that space that's available to anyone that has the desire, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm assuming too, like what a blessing that probably was to learn how to do that. You're laughing and nodding your head like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Like I can't even, and I'm like getting emotional thinking about it, but like I am so much happier than I have ever been, even before I knew about the porn. Before I knew about the porn, I think I was the happiest I'd ever been with the capacity that I had. But I'm just in this place where my life, I feel so much more alive and full in my own life. And I'm just so grateful for these God-given tools that have helped me so much.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and tell us about your marriage now. How's your marriage now?
Oh my gosh. It's amazing. Like if you would have told me 10 years ago, hey, by the way, you're going to be, living in the south of France and your husband are going to be working from home and your kids are going to be doing this and this and this. Like if someone would have told me that, I would have just kind of like laughed in their faces. Like, no, like that's not possible. Right. Because my brain wasn't looking for, like, I never tried to send my brain down that evidence path to find evidence that something like that could happen. And so, me doing the work on myself, and I think something important to share too, is I chose to do it I don't want to say first because he was doing his own healing in his own order and everything happens in the way that it's totally meant to. But I was willing to like take my own step into coaching before him. Mm-hmm. And this doesn't happen in every single marriage, but what I do feel like it did is like it opened up space for him to figure himself out without worrying so much about like my emotions and how I was going to react and how I was going to feel, because he already was like in this like shame spiral show, right, where if he told me that he looked at porn, I would react and withdraw. And it is absolutely okay to respond that way. And there are plenty of like, I have a lot of resources to help women like take care of themselves when that happens, so they can like know that they're going to be okay. But also I feel like it opened up space for him to just kind of feel himself out in his own healing while I was doing my own independent healing. And then ultimately we were able to like come together interdependently in this really like beautiful, loving way where we don't need each other to be something for us to be happy. We can just both sustain and love ourselves enough and then come together in this like really beautiful like hybrid that's better than I could have ever pictured.
Yeah, cool. I love it. I love that. Thanks for sharing. What a blessing for him too, that you were willing to go through that, because I mean, a blessing for you, a blessing for him. So many of my clients are just so worried about their spouses and feel so much shame because of their thoughts, about their spouses and their spouses' reactions, which is fine. Like you said, it's not a bad thing to react and to be upset, but what a blessing that is for you to also go and take care of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. What can I do when he won't talk to me about it? We have communication struggles.
That's a great question, because there's like a myriad of reasons why he won't talk about it. So if I were to think of like my husband, well, first of all, I think actually I'll talk about where my husband's brain might've been when he didn't want to talk about it. Sometimes there might've been times where I tried to like push an agenda of some sort, whether it was like around porn or, for us, some of the struggles were around like him working, him not working, me working, and me want, stuff like that. But I will say like my husband like was just so worried that about my response to how he was doing or not doing, that he would just like, he couldn't always handle it. Right. Because I think we forget how conditioned men are to quote unquote, like make wives happy. Right. And I think we're conditioned as women, and I'm being general, but like generally speaking, I think a lot of women are conditioned in other ways too, to believe that, our happiness is conditioned on what he does and that we're supposed to make him happy in certain ways too. But I think a lot of times it can just be really tough because he might just be in shame. And he's like, well, if I tell her, then she's going to withdraw. And actually, if you think about it too, you'll have to tell me what your thoughts are. But like, there are women who, don't want to have sex when this happens. And then there's some ideas or beliefs that have been passed down by society that like, men actually need sex. And so then they get in this, like their own little like catch 22 where they're like, well, crap, if I tell her I don't get this thing that I need. And then he's like, but if I tell her, she can't handle it. And so they get really stuck. And so of course I want to just make sure it's very clear that that's not something women, that men don't actually need sex to survive. Right. But I think it can just be helpful to have a little bit of understanding of like where he might be coming from. Right. Like, yeah, I think a lot of it just has to do with not being able to handle wife's response and feeling really guilty. But what do you think? Like, what do you see a lot?
1,000%. It's the shame. Shame. And then that will trigger some more shame for them. And when you're feeling shame, what you do is you hide and you avoid. So you're going to hide and avoid from your spouse. You're going to hide and avoid from God. You're going to hide and avoid from yourself. That might be what's happening. Yeah. It's like that person you so want to disappoint the least. Like when they're going to be totally disappointed every time it happens. And here you are like, I'm trying to stop, but I don't know how. Right. Because as Sarah teaches, this is like a mental skill set that we're teaching, right? How to follow urges, how to, process emotions. And if we don't know how, it can just feel really like, I could see it feeling really like hopeless too. Like something's wrong with me. Why am I not strong enough to do this? When it has nothing to do with that. It's just about, right, what's wrong? It's about your skills. So, yeah. I think a lot of times, at least I would say with most of my clients, like it's a matter of that, like not feeling safe to, not wanting to, feeling shame, disempowered, and feeling like there's no really good way out. And I think sometimes, just to be totally straight, there might be some sort of like entitlement that some men might feel like where, whatever that might be, there might be some entitlement here or there, but I think for the client or for a woman, it could just be, if the woman is the one wondering, is just being willing to ask why. And I would just say, like, if you want to have these conversations, like try to do it from a space where that like you can have your own back or you can take care of yourself afterwards. Because I think sometimes what happens with women is like, we don't know how to handle our pain or our own shame around a lot of this. And then we ask lots of questions, but it's like literally wanting details to like punch ourselves in the gut. And so I think just being really clear beforehand, like what makes sense for me to know? What do I need to know? What actually doesn't matter for me to know? But what were you going to say? I always love hearing what you have to say. Well, I was just going to say that's a good transition into one of the big questions that I hear a lot is, why am I not enough? Why am I not enough for him? Yeah. So my opinion, Sarah, is that this is just total conditioning. So even if a lot of time, I will say in majority of cases, the husband's like, does not believe that about you, right? No. Like his porn. Well, first of all, every time he looks at porn, it has nothing to do with you. Okay. So it's very likely that this habit was around before you may have even come into the picture. So, and, I would say if it wasn't a habit before spouses came into the picture, I think sometimes men use a lot of willpower because they've been told, it always gets better after you get married. And that's just a myth. It's not true. And so I guess my point is like, I think there's just this idea that's been passed down by, I would say, the porn industry and by men and women, that if we were enough, he wouldn't need to resort to that. But what I want to just offer is that
they're actually not connected, even though a lot of people believe that it is. But I think the fact that most men are looking before marriage provides a lot of evidence that it really doesn't have to do with you.
I once read this amazing quote that said, it was from a bishop. It was called Confessions of a Mormon Bishop. I don't remember who it was by, but if you Google it, you'll find it. And he says, I've learned that pornography is not about sexual appetites. It's about escape.
Totally.
So that's exactly what it is. It's kind of the same thing as if, your husband was out drinking a bunch of Mountain Dew. Mm-hmm. Am I not making enough food for him? Am I not giving him enough food? It has nothing to do with that.
That's such a good, yeah. And it took some time for me, even after getting certified as a coach, it took some time for me to wrap my mind around that too, that it actually could be that, like as simple as men wanting to escape from emotions. And so what I want to offer too is like, if that feels too far-fetched for you to believe, you don't have to believe that yet, but you can always offer yourself these like open-ended statements or ideas. Like, if that's possible, that's true. Like, I want to learn more or something like that. Like, I don't believe that's true right now. And that's okay. Right. Something.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong that this has something to do with me.
Yeah.
Maybe.
What if I was wrong? Yeah. So good. So good. Bringing in that curiosity. Love it.
Another thing too is sometimes we think that pornography is a replacement for sex with, a person, when in reality it's so different. And your husband's, the ideal experience with you is connection and vulnerability and all these things that he couldn't get from pornography. So even if you're having a hard time comparing yourself to the people he might be seeing, it's just so helpful sometimes to see it in this way that that's not what sex is about. Sex isn't about looking this way. Sex isn't about having this certain body type. Sex is about this connection and vulnerability that can't replace.
Right. Even if, again, I'm always like, even if men do think that, right? And even if women do think that, a lot of these ideas have just been passed down. And so I think just checking in with ourselves, like if we're thinking about some belief that we have and we like pause and check in with ourselves, if it's not feeling that great, it might be worth questioning, like, is this true? Maybe it's not true. What would be different for me if it wasn't true,
Yeah, so good. I love it. Thank you. Let's see, which one should we talk about now? We have so many.
You're fine.
Is it considered cheating? What about our covenants?
I think that's a good question. And if I was talking to the person asking this question, I might ask something like, why are you asking? Just out of pure curiosity. And why do you want to know? Like, how will knowing this answer serve you? Because I think sometimes we look for like this black and white explanation outside of ourselves so we can like know what to do. Right. And so it could be worth just asking yourself, like, do I want to know so that what?
So good.
So I think there's that. And I think, sometimes one thing my husband has said is like, sometimes it's like human nature to want to make something sound as bad as possible because we think that will motivate us to stop more. Mm-hmm. So that could be something too. But in my opinion, like, do you want my opinion?
Sure.
I would actually love to hear your opinion. In my opinion, it's not. And I'm going to say that being very clear that when I was going through it, it kind of felt like it. But that was before I'd found coaching and stuff like that. And so if it feels like that to you, it's totally, I just want to say, I think any response to anything your husband, anything about what your husband is doing or not doing is totally normal. And if you're open to exploring other ideas, it could be worth it just so that you're not beating yourself up about things. And sometimes if we decide to think about it as cheating, then I think some people might think, well, there's some grounds for divorce. But what I like to help my women do is get to this place where they can stay married from a place of love and abundance, and they can get divorced from a place of love and abundance. And so spending a lot of time deciding the semantics of whether that's cheating or not, like how is that helping you develop your intimate, loving relationship with yourself, you know?
Yeah. So good. And we don't have to justify divorce based off of deciding that it's cheating or not. We can still get divorced without all of that if we want to.
Yeah, which I think brings up a good point, because you'll have to tell me what your thoughts are. But I feel like I remember as a kid hearing that all the time. If there was a divorce, it's like, oh, he was doing this. Oh, yeah, he was doing that. And so could you imagine being a man who's like told like, never, 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 like, don't do it. Don't do it. It's so bad. It breaks up marriages. And then having that habit. Could you imagine like my husband literally thought like, he's going to go to hell and lose everything, and she's going to kick me out of the house. Like the night that he told me, he's like, she might kick me out of the house and I might never see her again. Right? So scary. And I think for women, the problem is too, is I think there are great intentions with these ideas and teachings about not looking at porn, but it's when we're believing some of that, it's really scary for us too. Right? Like, oh my gosh, our family, our eternal family, things can get broken up. And we can go down, it's different, but a similar fear, into our own fear cycles too.
Yeah. Something that I've been sitting on and thinking about and sharing with my clients too is that it's not pornography that breaks up relationships ever. And sometimes people like to use that, like, oh, they got divorced because someone was looking at porn. Yeah. It was never that. Because there are also lots of marriages that are not broken up and someone's looking at porn, and I'm not saying, one way is better than the other way, but people and relationships, because of people and because of what they decide, or because of all the other stuff going on below the surface. I mean, I know you experienced this with your husband. There was so much going on below the surface that was causing the pornography. The pornography wasn't the root of all the problem. There was stuff going on below that was causing.
Yeah, it was more like more of like a side effect. And, he had, well, and here's the thing too, like I will say, like he had a lot of childhood trauma that he was working through and a lot of anxiety and depression. There's like, some family history there, but again, I say that, but you don't need to have that to have a porn habit. We don't need like an excuse for like a porn habit, but he, had porn introduced to him as, it was inadvertent, but he had it introduced to him as a young teen or whatever. I actually don't know how old he was. So it was like normalized in a way for him. And so it was like a way that he knew to like escape. And I think that happens to a lot of men, and so for my husband, it really was just like an escape or like a numbing thing.
Which helps us not make it about ourselves. We're doing that as spouses or.
Yeah. And I will just say, like, I think if you, as you hear us say this, if you're like, yeah, but I'm different, or yeah, but it's different for me, I just want to let you know that it's really normal to, sometimes there's so much dissonance between how we've been conditioned for decades with the thousands of messages we've received from media and other places in our lives, that sometimes just hearing, oh, it's not you, it's not about you. There's so much dissonance that our brain might just discard, delete. That's not true. You're different. And so, but I do want you to know that a lot of that is just conditioned into you or into us. And anything conditioned into us can be totally deconditioned or conditioned out of us.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I love that. What about resentment, Lindsay? How can I not resent him?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that resentment can come from a myriad of places, right? It can come from not setting proper boundaries. And it also can just like simply come from our thinking. And I think ultimately it really does come from our thinking. That being said, if you are the type of person that blames yourself a lot, you don't want to blame yourself for all the resentment you felt, because guess what? You didn't know, you might not have the skills or the skill set to work through this. And so I think it can come from those places. And I guess my question might be, what is spending time resenting him keeping you from doing, accomplishing, creating? Is it keeping you from your healing, right? Is it affecting your day to day? Is there somewhere else you prefer to focus your thinking? So I think I want to be clear. I think resentment is okay. And it's really normal to be there. And then if you get to a place where you decide like, I'm ready to move on and feel something else, it could be worth exploring the why behind it, but also not judging yourself for your resentment too.
Yeah, I love it. The message here is it's valid. It's okay. Mm-hmm. And we can have something different if you would like, or if you're ready.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it in the shorter version. It's okay. It's normal to feel it. And when you're ready, like there's plenty of other emotions available to you for sure.
Yeah. And to go about healing resentment or working through resentment, what would be one thing you would say about that if you are ready for something a little bit different? And I know it'll be case by case and person by person. Yeah. So this is very general, but.
No, I mean, I think a lot of the resentment might come from our perception of how things should be, or some sort of expectation or manual we have for our spouse and how they should behave. And mm-hmm. sometimes we're not taking responsibility for our own emotions, and we feel like he has control or power over us. And so it's like we feel like our emotions are in his control, but we know we don't have control over him. So it makes sense that we might like resent him because we feel really powerless. But so I just want to say it's very normal to feel it, but you absolutely can choose to just kind of ask yourself, like, actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I think I did a post or something recently about, I think sometimes resentment might come. I think there's like that should or that expectation piece, but I also mm-hmm. think there's a little bit of like fear or lack of belief in ourselves around creating what we want to create. And if we don't believe that we can create our own happiness or have that power over ourselves or our emotions, sometimes we might just fall into resentment because we don't know how to get to where we want to go. And what I want to just offer is getting out of resentment, if it's something you want, is totally available to anyone who has the desire, for sure.
Yeah. And the best way to do that is kind of what, in my opinion, is what you were talking about before when you talked about going and doing the work on yourself and being able to feel power and trust that you mm-hmm. can create the life that you want, no matter mm-hmm. what anyone else in your life is doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's do this question then. I feel a responsibility for stopping them viewing pornography. What are your thoughts on that?
So I always just like to be really clear. Total conditioning. Okay. A lot of us were conditioned as teens that we could be a part of the opposite. We could be a part of like, dressing a certain way or showing up in a certain way to like help with their thoughts and behavior. But the problem with like teaching women that they have that power is that the other side of that coin is the opposite, right?
Right. And then it's like you get married and all of a sudden now you're in charge of all their sexual fulfillment. Flip the coin.
Yeah. So when you try to teach someone that they're responsible for like influencing for good and things like that, unfortunately, we're also seating in the belief that we're responsible for the other stuff too. And so if that is you, just know again, like, oh, this has just been something that's been taught. What do I want to think about this now? Right? We can kind of step back from the forest and just decide if we do want to take responsibility for it or not. And the thing too is like some men and some spouses might actually still believe that. And they can totally believe that. And you can totally decide to not believe that. Right. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes there might be a little bit of friction in a marriage where, a woman is putting her own stake in the ground for what she believes. But again, anytime we're like setting these boundaries or putting our own stake in the ground for like our own beliefs, spouses, like women and husbands too, I think it's so powerful because again, that's where we find the true essence of the marriage.
Oh, so good. What do you mean by the true essence of the marriage?
Oh, it's a good question. So, a lot of times we like spouses are coming together kind of like in like a codependent way. And I don't mean that with a negative connotation. A lot of us have been literally raised from like age 2 that we could make people happy, right? Like by sharing a toy or not sharing a toy. So a lot of the stuff, again, conditioning. But what I will say is like, as women or men, when we are developing our true selves and like really tethering ourselves to who we are, who we want to become, like we are allowing our truer self to come through. And while we're doing that, we're giving our spouse an opportunity to decide, ooh, I like that. Ooh, not sure about that. Ooh, that's not cool. Right. And so, but if we're both constantly people pleasing and like not, it's like this game of like a game where we're like keeping score, or we're trying to like make a decision based on what they're going to do. Neither of us are letting our true selves come through. So we're not able to see what's actually there. And that's why I think the healing individually for the woman and the man can be so, it's like just a total win-win, because either way they've they've developed out their own self-concept in a really loving and accepting way. And they're going to feel better than ever. And they're going to see that that their spouse is what they want, or that, if their spouse responds from this space of entitlement, like with an attitude of entitlement, then it can be helpful to be like, oh, maybe this is what my marriage is, right? Like for me personally, me working on myself, like through coaching and everything, like after 3 or 4 months and me going and getting certified and everything, at first my husband was like, oh, she's just on a high. Like, it's just gonna it's like coming back from EFY, like it'll just go. But after a while, he was just like, whoa, like she's different. Like, what does she know that I don't know? Right. He was just like, wow. Right. So me working on myself and turning inward helped him to be like, I like that. Right. And, there might be some marriages where the spouse is like, not interested in that. But the thing is, it's a win for you because you have gotten yourself to either way, it's a win because you've gotten yourself to this place where you can be okay no matter what. And then we don't bring our fear about what could happen, what might not happen. And we don't bring that into the present anyway, and then not act from our own authenticity as well. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. We hear this quote, fill your own cup so it'll overflow into other people's, or we hear a lot, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can really take care of other people. And this is the way that you're saying it is probably just another a little bit deeper way of that concept. And especially when it comes to pornography, it's really easy to go into feeling very powerless. Yeah. But the message here, and you're such a great example of this, is that you can come back to a place of full power in your own life and full fulfillment in your own life, no matter what is going on with your family or with your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just like taking that fill your own cup thing a step further. Like I always like to drive home this idea that like you are worth filling up your cup just because you exist as a human, and that's enough. And a beautiful side effect of that is that like you acting in your own self-interest actually is in the best interest of your marriage and your other relationships and your mothering and things like that,
Yeah. And your family. That's something I've really been learning this last year, especially with my business growing and just having so much fun with coaching. And at first there's a little bit of guilt.
Yeah.
And then I heard some mom, I think it might've been Brooke Castillo on one of her podcasts, say, my business makes me a better mom. Spending time working my business makes me a better mom. And I saw so much evidence for how that was true. And it took me a while to get there. But now it just is like a total true belief. And that's what's so amazing too about the things that Lindsay and I have been talking about. They might not feel natural for you to believe right now, and they might feel tricky and hard, but it's so amazing what our brains can do with new beliefs, how they can really become an ingrained belief where one day you just wake up and you just believe something different because you've practiced and you've worked at it. And one day you wake up and you feel powerful and love and fulfilled in your relationships because you've done the work on yourself, not because you changed the other person.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's so good.
So let's do one more question for just a few minutes. This last one, which is, I feel like I'm missing out on a real relationship. My husband says he prefers masturbation and pornography instead of sex with me.
That's a great one too, because I think there's again, a myriad of reasons why this could be happening, right? For some humans, it might be easier for them because they don't have to worry about vulnerability and connection when they're masturbating and looking at porn, right? Like for some reason with men, and maybe you can explain more than me, Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but there is something about like what they make it mean if they get turned away for sex. Not all men, but some do. And so it feels very vulnerable to them to approach their wife for sex. And then when she's taking space and figuring things out, he like, again, makes that mean something about him. And so for him, he's like, well, that felt horrible. I might as well do that than try to engage in this complex thing. Right. And so when guys don't know how to manage their emotions on their own, to bring another human into the picture who could say no, and then they make it mean all these things about themselves. Yeah. Like it.
Yeah. Similar. I mean, it's not your fault that they're saying that they would prefer that over you. And that doesn't mean that you're not as good as the things that he's saying. Has nothing to do with that and everything to do with, yeah. I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit similar around the conditioning around being the breadwinner, right? Some men get really self-conscious or upset if their wife starts to make more money than them. It has nothing to do with the wife. It has everything to do with some of their own healing that needs to happen and some of their own deconditioning of their beliefs that need to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you can also just like keep in mind too, is when we're taking care of ourselves and turning inward, we might actually decide that we want more out of our relationship than a relationship where that's where he's turning all the time too. And that can be done from a place of like love as well. And so, I just love the idea that like, there isn't always like a right or a wrong, like I've had like these amazing breakthroughs with this one client in particular. When we first started working together, she was like, she always wanted to know when he was looking, but it was very like fear-based. And so she could beat herself up and go into panic attacks and stuff. And so we took a break asking him so she could really just focus on herself, right? But she was wanting to ask him so she could beat herself up. And then we're getting near the end of our coaching, and she's just like in this beautiful place where she's like, I really care about our intimacy and our connection. And now the reason I want to know is so that I can just kind of gauge what's going on and know more about my marriage. So can you kind of see the difference there?
100%. That's going to be so helpful for so many people to hear. Like, what is the result that you're looking for from asking them all the time? If they're looking at it, is that result so that you can, like this client of yours, the result of trying to figure out if he's looking at porn was to find reason to feel bad.
Right. It was like to beat herself up and to take responsibility. And honestly, it's kind of like one of those things where to try to figure out how we can prevent it again. I think sometimes we try to like analyze how it happens from this kind of fear-based space, because we're like, well, maybe I should have done this, maybe if I weighed 5 pounds less, maybe this, maybe that, maybe if I looked like her. And then ultimately, like, that's just the way to like keep punching ourselves in the gut and beating ourselves up. And now it's more coming from this place of like, I personally like love myself so much that I want to have this really intimate, connected relationship with my spouse. And now I'm ready to hear it because I know how to take care of myself either way. And I can decide in a really loving way, like what makes sense for me as far as like how much he tells me or doesn't tell me. It's insane. It's beautiful. Like this took her less than 6 months and it took me like 3 years because there weren't coaches around teaching this kind of stuff when I was going through it. So
good. So the moral of the episode, you guys, like go hire Lindsay. From my perspective, or, at least like you deserve to take care of yourself and you're going to get so much further. You're going to be so much happier. You're going to heal so much quicker if you focus on that instead of focusing on changing or controlling or, anything with the other spouse.
Yeah. And I think, again, as women, I think a lot of us, again, I'm being general, of course, a lot of us, I think, have been conditioned to like discount our emotions. And we're like, oh, but his problem's this big. So let's throw everything at this problem. But what we're doing, my problems aren't as big. My emotions don't matter as much. But the thing is like pain is pain. It's not comparable. Your pain gets to be real and valid, and you are totally worth finding and creating your own healing too. And sometimes it happens before him, and that's okay. That doesn't have to be a problem.
And the best thing you can do for him is to do that for yourself and allow yourself to be where you're at and allow yourself to feel the pain and then allow yourself to move past it when you're ready.
Yeah. Love it so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, Lindsay, how can we find you? How can we hear more from you? How can we work with you? Give us those details.
You're so sweet. So on my website, I have this awesome guide. It's called Find Relief Right Now. And it's a guide to ground and take care of yourself, regardless of like what he's doing, because we want to like make sure we can get present so we can like think more clearly about things. I also have an upcoming webinar in July on body image. And so anyone on my email list, which you can get on if you go to lindsaypoelmancoaching.com, anyone on my email list will have like the first access to the webinar as it comes up. And it's going to be amazing because a lot of times that's where we go to, like body image stuff. So there's so much amazingness happening over there. And I just can't wait to see where we keep going as women.
So good. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I know so many people got a lot of great goodness out of this episode. So
thank you, Sarah.
All right, you guys have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye. If you're ready to apply what you're hearing in this podcast and finally overcome pornography for good, I'd love to be your coach. I've created a virtual program with the intent to give you everything that you need to quit. Once you join, you have lifetime access to the content and lifetime access to individual support through coaching calls and coaching boards. For more information, check out sarahbrewer.com/work with me.